They said it was just a kitchen upgrade. I said it was the betrayal that changed everything. You ever had someone you love smile at you while quietly cutting away your future? I was 27, accepted into New York University with a $200,000 trust fund waiting, until I found out it was gone, spent on brass faucets and Italian tile by the very people who raised me. Most of us believe trust funds are about security, about love passed down through generations. But what happens when the ones you trust the most rewrite that story without you? In this episode, I uncover the emails, the receipts, the truth they hoped I'd never find, and I show you exactly how I held them legally accountable without needing their permission. If you've ever relied on someone to do the right thing with your money, this story might change the way you think. Because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't confronting strangers. It's standing up to the people who raised you and realizing that silence was never safety. It was the leash. Before we dive into the story, let's connect. Have you ever felt stuck, searching for the depths of manifestation? Drop a 3 in the comments if you're ready to unlock your true potential, or a 4 if you're still finding your way. Let's start this journey together. They said it was just a kitchen upgrade. I said it was the betrayal that changed everything. The email came on a rainy Tuesday. I had just microwaved leftover chili and was sitting cross-legged on my couch, balancing the bowl on a pot holder atop a stack of grad school brochures. When I saw the subject line, NYU School of Social Work, congratulations, my spoon stopped mid-air. I got in. I dropped the spoon, chili forgotten, and laughed aloud to no one. My apartment in Boulder was small and secondhand in every way. Thrifted mugs, a couch with one sunken armrest, books stacked on the floor, but that moment made it feel like the world had opened up. The first person I thought of wasn't Mom or Dad. It was Grandma Jo. I remembered what she once said when I was 17 and asking about trust funds and independence. If they control your money, they'll think they control you. I hadn't understood it then. I do now. I called our family CPA the next morning, expecting a simple transaction, just enough to cover first semester tuition and housing deposits. He sounded off as soon as he picked up. "Rachel, good morning," he said too carefully. "I was just reviewing your file." I smiled into the phone. "I got into NYU. I'll need to start the withdrawal process for the trust." Silence. Then a soft cough. "Rachel, there have been drawdowns." "Drawdowns? Your parents authorized several disbursements over the last 18 months. I assumed you were aware." My smile faded. "How much is left?" Significantly less than the original $200,000. I'd need to check exact numbers." I thanked him. I don't remember hanging up. The Linwood house had always looked like something out of a catalog. White siding, black shutters, potted hydrangeas. But that day, when I walked up the driveway with my hands shaking, it looked like a stranger lived there. Mom greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and a wine glass in hand. "You should have called. I would have baked something." I stood in the foyer, my eyes already pulled toward the smell of new wood and citrus cleaner. "I need to talk to you and Dad." She smiled brightly, oblivious, or pretending to be. "Wait until you see the kitchen. You'll die." I followed her down the hallway into the heart of the remodel. It gleamed. Brass fixtures, white quartz countertops that looked like poured milk, a double oven that still had its instruction manual taped to the side. "Imported Italian tile," she said, touching the backsplash like it was fine art. "And this faucet? It's a statement piece. The designer said it was iconic." I opened my mouth, then closed it. The only sound was the soft hum of the new smart fridge. "What happened to the trust fund?" I asked finally. She blinked. "What?" "The fund. The money Grandpa set aside for me." "Oh, that." She waved a hand as if brushing lint from her shoulder. "Well, it was just sitting there, honey, and you weren't even in grad school yet." Dad appeared in the doorway. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his eyes locked on the floor. "I got in," I said. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. NYU. Mom froze for a beat. Oh, that's lovely. She took a sip of wine. But you'll figure something out. There's always scholarships. I looked around the kitchen again, suddenly aware of how cold the quartz felt against my fingers. She had spent it, my future, on fixtures and flooring. I left without another word. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the floor with my laptop open. The screen glowed pale against the dark. I logged into the banking portal for the trust account, the one I hadn't touched since I was 21. Frozen. I clicked again. Same result. A red banner flashed. Account restricted. Contact administrator. I stared at it for a long time. Outside, the wind rattled the fire escape. Inside, I cradled a chipped mug of tea in my palms and tried to steady my breath. The kitchen at my parents' house had lavender-scented soap, brass drawer pulls, and hand-blown pendant lights. Mine had peeling laminate, a single burner that only worked when you jiggled the knob, and a drawer that stuck every time. But I paid for every inch of it myself. And suddenly, I realized I was no longer the girl who needed their permission. I used to think the trust fund was a safety net. Turns out, it was just a leash with a ribbon on it. The break room at work smelled like burnt popcorn and powdered creamer. I stared at the vending machine's flickering LED screen while the coffee sputtered into my mug, the chipped one with a faded sunflower. The machine dripped slow, like it knew I needed time to think. I'd printed the trust documents that morning after 2 hours of combing through old emails. A copy dated 2007 sat folded in my bag, along with a yellow highlighter, 3 sticky notes, and the voice of my father echoing from years ago. With a trust fund, you'll always have a head start. He never said it came with strings, or that he'd hold the scissors. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I opened the folder. The document was long and padded with legal language, but one line stood out like a bruise. The beneficiary, Rachel Linwood, shall retain full rights to said assets. Co-trustees may act on her behalf solely in her interest. Solely in her interest. I called the CPA during lunch. He picked up on the second ring. Rachel, he said, cautious again, I was expecting you might follow up. You said the trust was drawn down. I need to know when and how much. He cleared his throat. Between 2020 and 2022, during the height of the pandemic, your parents cited urgent home improvement needs. It was framed as essential. I processed the disbursements under that assumption. I leaned against the counter, coffee untouched. They never asked me. I never approved anything. I understand. But as co-trustees, they were supposed to act in my interest, not renovate their backsplash. He was silent. I hung up before I said something worse. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I drove 40 minutes to my grandmother's house on the edge of Lafayette, where the porches creaked and wildflowers bloomed on impulse. Grandma Jo was out front in her usual spot, rocking slow in her chair with a mason jar of sweet tea sweating on the side table. She looked at me the way only she could, like she saw all the pieces before I said a word. "Let me guess," she said. "It's not about the money. It's about what they took from you without asking." I nodded and sat beside her. My hands trembled as I laid the folder in my lap. They used it, my trust, without telling me, and now they won't even admit it. She sipped her tea. "You always were too polite. That's not a bad thing. But sometimes, sugar doesn't work when vinegar's needed." I opened the folder again and pointed to the line I'd highlighted. They breached the agreement. I don't know what to do next. Grandma Jo leaned back, letting the rocker creak beneath her. "You know I worked in a law office for 20 years before I retired? Real estate mostly, but I read enough paperwork to spot a loophole before lunch. That clause, solely in her interest, that's no small phrase." I looked at her startled. "You kept all this from me?" She smiled, small and secret. "I kept it until you needed it." The next day, I found myself in the waiting room of Claire Mosley, a local attorney recommended by one of Grandma's old church friends. Her office smelled like lemon oil and old books. No receptionist, just a neat stack of magazines and a small brass bell. Claire herself was composed and meticulous, with rimless glasses and a handshake that said she listened more than she spoke. We sat across from each other, a desk between us and the weight of 2 decades of family trust. "I've reviewed the documents," she said. "You are listed as the sole beneficiary, and your parents were acting as co-trustees." "They used the money," I said, "without telling me. During COVID, apparently." Claire nodded, flipping through the paperwork with practiced fingers. Under Colorado law, a trustee's first duty is fiduciary loyalty, meaning they must act in the best interest of the beneficiary at all times. If they made withdrawals without notice or necessity, that constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. I felt my shoulders lift slightly. What happens now? You have options. First, you can request a court injunction to freeze any accounts that may contain diverted funds. That prevents them from moving or hiding assets while the case is under review. Freeze their accounts? Yes, you'd be within your rights. She turned the page and pointed to a paragraph halfway down. There's also a clause in your trust. In the event of trustee misconduct, the beneficiary shall have full standing to pursue legal restitution, including but not limited to asset recovery and administrative replacement. I stared at the words. They looked different now, not cold or bureaucratic, but like armor. Claire closed the folder. This will be a process. It won't be easy, but you do have a case. I looked out her office window, where trees stirred in the wind outside. My heart beat loud in my chest, not out of fear, but focus. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted the version of me that believed in just a kitchen upgrade to be done with. I began, my voice quieter than I expected. Then louder, "I think I'm ready to file." Claire nodded once, like she'd been waiting for me to say it. Outside, the sky was clearing. Somewhere between Grandma Jo's porch and that quiet legal office, I'd crossed a line, not into war, but into resolve. The tulips in the Linwoods' backyard were arranged just so. Reds in the center, yellows radiating outward like a color wheel someone had taken a ruler to. The table was dressed in pale blue linen, set with white plates and gold flatware, the kind of details my mother loved orchestrating. But I showed up in jeans and a plain navy sweater, my hair in a low ponytail. Not because I didn't know how to dress the part, but because I didn't want to anymore. "Rachel," Cheryl called across the yard, wine glass in hand. "So glad you could join us. Finally." I gave a polite nod and found a seat at the far end, close enough to the buffet table to avoid too much eye contact, far enough to dodge small talk. Grandma Jo sat next to me, her fingers wrapped around a mason jar of sweet tea. She didn't say much, but she patted my knee once, firm, reassuring. There was something grounding in her quiet presence, a steady hum beneath the white noise of curated perfection. Uncle Donnie was already halfway into a story about a client who got arrested for stealing copper wiring from a retirement home. "And they say crime doesn't take holidays," he chuckled, nudging Mark, who gave a tight-lipped smile that never reached his eyes. I scanned the scene, the curated playlist of soft jazz, the crystal pitcher of mimosas, the coordinated outfits, pastel dresses, pressed shirts. It was all so clean. So staged, like nothing had ever gone wrong here, like this family hadn't hollowed out my future and replaced it with brushed brass fixtures and a double oven. Cheryl tapped her glass gently, rising with the poise of someone auditioning for a lifestyle commercial. Her dress was floral silk, her lipstick matched the tulips. She looked like the cover of a spring catalog. "Family," she began, "is the greatest renewal spring offers us. In uncertain times, we hold each other a little tighter. We come together like these tulips, blooming side by side." I felt my stomach knot. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but I knew what she was doing, painting a version of us that never existed. I stared down at my chipped plate, the reflection of the sun bouncing off a smear of hollandaise sauce. "So," she smiled, "let's raise our glasses to renewal, to togetherness, and to gratitude." Everyone raised their glass. I did not. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. "Just so we're clear," I said, rising to my feet, "I've frozen the accounts. I'm pursuing restitution for the trust fund." The silence dropped like a curtain. Uncle Donnie stopped chewing mid-bite. A few aunts exchanged glances. Mark set his glass down carefully, not looking up. Cheryl's smile faltered but didn't break. Yet, "Rachel," she said slowly, "this isn't the time." "No, Mom. The time was when you spent my future remodeling a kitchen you don't even cook in." Gasps from the far end of the table. Someone dropped a fork. I looked around at their faces. Polite confusion, thinly veiled judgment, the kind of discomfort people wear when they don't know who to blame but still want someone to blame. "This brunch is the last family performance I'll attend," I continued. "I'm not the background character in your fantasy." I didn't wait for a response. I walked toward the gate, heart pounding but pace steady. Each step felt like peeling off a layer of silence I had worn for years. As I reached the sidewalk, Uncle Donnie called after me. "Your mom says you're just having a phase. That true?" I didn't turn around. At the corner, I paused. The air smelled like cut grass and sugar-glazed ham. Behind me, the laughter had resumed, quieter now. As if I had walked out of a play they were determined to keep performing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a new message from Claire. "Documents filed. Hearing scheduled." I exhaled. Grandma Jo's hand had lingered on my arm before I left. She hadn't said a word, but that single gesture was louder than anything else I'd heard that day. Some families pass down recipes. Mine passed down silence, guilt, and a habit of making appearances count more than truths. But today, I broke that cycle. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't yell or plead. It's to stand, speak, and walk out, on your own terms. Grandma Jo's attic didn't look like a war room, but that's exactly what it became. The stairs creaked as I followed her up, ducking under a low rafter. Dust floated in the late afternoon light, catching on lavender sachets she'd hung from the beams, her way of keeping the place from smelling like mothballs and memory. "Left side, third row," she said, gesturing toward the shelves. "That's where I kept the tax years." Each plastic tub was labeled in her spidery handwriting. 2015, joint return, 2016, property loan, 2020, COVID expenses. She sat in her rocker, her silver hair pinned back with a clip shaped like a butterfly, and watched as I began sorting through the boxes. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that I would know it when I found it. It started small. A Lowe's invoice from May 2020, addressed to Mark Linwood, paid with funds from the trust's bank account. Then came the contractor emails, correspondence about remodeling permits, tile samples, and labor payments, all linked to an account that was legally supposed to fund my future. I pulled another folder and flipped through receipts printed on fading thermal paper. Granite delivery, brass fixtures, a Sub-Zero fridge that cost more than my old Toyota, all paid for in the middle of a pandemic while I was eating peanut butter crackers for dinner and declining Zoom birthday parties because I couldn't afford a gift. Then, tucked into a yellow envelope, I found the spa invoices, weekends at mountain resorts, full-service massage packages for 2, bottle service from the hotel bar. The handwriting scrawled across one of the receipts read, "Happy anniversary, babe." I stared at it, the ink curling under the years. I could almost hear Cheryl's laugh in the background, carefree and oblivious. "They didn't even try to cover their tracks," I said, half to myself. Grandma Jo nodded, then reached into a wooden chest beside her chair. She pulled out a thin manila folder and handed it to me. "I never told anyone I kept this," she said. "Back when they made you that trust, I asked for a copy, just in case." Inside were the original trustee letters, typed and signed by both my parents, and a breakdown of fiduciary responsibilities. Mark's signature, in blue ink, stared back at me. A promise to act in good faith, with duty and loyalty, solely in the interest of the beneficiary. The paper trembled in my hands, not from fear, but from something colder, final. "Thank you," I said. We didn't speak much after that. She poured sweet tea into 2 mason jars, and we sat on the porch as the sky melted into dusky pink. The next day, I spread everything across my apartment floor: bank statements, receipts, annotated trust documents, Post-its scrawled with dates and account balances. I took photos, I uploaded backups, I labeled folders like a forensic accountant. The floor was a chaos of truth, and I didn't want to clean it up until someone else had to see it too. At Claire Mosley's office, I laid out the evidence like a quilt. Her brow furrowed as she turned the pages. She wore a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and an expression that didn't flinch. "This is enough," she said. I exhaled slowly. Claire tapped one clause in the trust documentation, the same one I'd read a dozen times but didn't fully believe until now. "In the event of trustee misconduct," she read, "the beneficiary has standing to pursue restitution through legal means, including but not limited to injunctions, account freezes, and formal recovery." Then she looked up. "You have a solid breach of fiduciary claim, Rachel. And you're not just asking for your money, you're asking the court to hold them accountable." She slid a document across the desk. "The filing to request a temporary freeze on Cheryl and Mark's personal accounts." I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. Signing that paper didn't bring a surge of satisfaction. It brought stillness, like watching something large sink into deep water. Claire opened her laptop and hit send. The email made a soft whoosh. I stared at the screen, watching the confirmation pop up. Sent at 4:42 p.m. There was no going back. That night, I stayed up later than usual. The floor still bore the marks of my quiet storm: highlighter smudges, bent paper corners, the smell of ink and lavender lingering. I made tea but forgot to drink it. I half listened to the buzz of a true crime podcast in the background, but none of it stuck. Just before midnight, I padded to the front door to lock up. That's when I saw it. A single sheet of paper had been slid under my door. No envelope. Just a folded note, handwritten in neat, deliberate script. "You've made a mistake. You'll regret this." No name. No signature. Just silence pressed into the paper. I stared at it for a long moment before folding it back up. Then I turned off the porch light. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. I stood by the vending machine, fingers gripping a bottle of water I hadn't opened. Claire was inside, collecting the last of the documents. The hearing was over. The judge's ruling was clear. The co-trusteeship held by Cheryl and Mark Linwood was revoked, effective immediately. Full control of the trust fund was returned to me. Restitution was ordered. A formal reprimand was issued. It didn't feel like victory. When the doors opened, Cheryl brushed past me without a glance. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile like a closing argument she hadn't been allowed to make. Mark lingered for a breath, mouth parting like he might say something. Then he mouthed, "I'm sorry," and followed her. I didn't respond. Outside, Boulder was draped in a drizzle. Claire offered to drive me home, but I declined. I needed the walk, the quiet, the soft slap of wet shoes on the sidewalk. People passed me without a second look. Just another woman walking alone in the rain. No one could tell I had just untied the financial noose that had quietly strangled my future. Back in my apartment, everything looked cleaner somehow, sparse, like I had finally taken inventory of what I was willing to keep and what no longer fit. The apartment smelled faintly of eucalyptus and dryer sheets. I made a cup of tea, sat in silence, and didn't turn on the TV. It rained lightly outside, tapping against the window like a quiet reassurance that the world hadn't stopped turning. I checked my phone. One unread message from a college friend. "Hey, Rach, just wanted to let you know we decided not to have you at the baby shower this weekend. It's not personal, just complicated, you know?" I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Then came another, an older neighbor from church. "I just wish you hadn't gone to court. Your mom looked so hurt. Hope you're okay." It amazed me how much people could talk about hurt without ever asking who caused it. They always say you find out who your real friends are when things get hard. They don't say how lonely that discovery feels. Later that evening, I stopped by Grandma Jo's. The house smelled like cinnamon and old wood, same as it always had. She was in the living room, a record spinning something warm and brassy while she stitched the hem of a quilt by hand. A lamp cast a golden pool over the fabric, catching each delicate stitch. "You win?" she asked, eyes still on the thread. I nodded. "Judge ruled in my favor. They're being removed as trustees. Restitution's coming." She placed the needle down and looked at me fully. "Good, but remember, healing doesn't mean forgetting. Some scars are meant to stay. They teach us where not to lean next time. I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like grief." Grandma Jo nodded. "Because it is. You're grieving the version of your family you hoped existed." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the record's gentle hiss between songs. Back at home, I opened my laptop. The NYU portal had a blinking notification. I clicked. "Dear Rachel Linwood, we are pleased to reinstate your admission to the New York University School of Public Policy, Fall 2023 term. Due to recent developments, we are also awarding you the Hamilton Fellowship, which covers full tuition and includes a mentorship under Dr. Lucas Mendez, your assigned peer advisor." It felt surreal. Less than 6 months ago, I'd considered abandoning the whole plan. The money was gone. My confidence eroded. And now, the very institution I thought I'd have to walk away from was welcoming me back, with more than I'd even asked for. It was like being seen again, after standing invisible in a room full of people who swore they loved you. Lucas Mendez. I remembered the name. He'd written a paper on economic justice that had once made me cry in a cafe. He was the reason I'd chosen public policy to begin with. I exhaled, slowly, deeply. Then I turned off my phone, drew the blinds, and let the silence stretch out across the apartment like a blanket I hadn't dared to wrap myself in for months. No noise, no explaining, no bracing myself for fallout. Just stillness, the kind that comes after a storm when everything is soaked, but somehow more honest. My laptop dinged again. A new email subject flashed across the screen. Linwood Scholarship. First application received. I sat still, fingers curled lightly around my mug, and let the weight of the moment settle. They'd started the scholarship already, with my name still attached. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, I took the long way home from work, not because I had errands, but because I needed time. Time to walk past the places that used to mean something different, used to feel safe. The bookstore on 14th, where Dad once surprised me with a signed copy of my favorite novel. The bakery where Mom and I split almond croissants after dentist appointments. Each corner held echoes, but memory doesn't equal permission. When I got back, there was a letter in my mailbox. Not typed, handwritten, no return address. "Rachel, I don't know if you'll ever forgive us, maybe you shouldn't. I let your mother handle things for too long, and when I realized it had gone too far, I thought silence was the lesser sin. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Dad." No signature, just a first name. No attempt to defend or excuse, just a sentence acknowledging what had been broken. I placed it in the drawer beside my bed, not to reread, just to keep a record. Because Grandma Jo was right. Paper trails are louder than apologies, but sometimes both are necessary. I turned off the light and let the room fill with shadows. and for once I didn't feel like I was alone inside them. Maybe being right doesn't mean you win. Maybe it just means you saw clearly while others kept their eyes closed. But even in the quiet, even with the cost, I'd choose clarity again, every time. They remodeled a kitchen. I rebuilt myself. The orientation room smelled faintly of new carpet and printed paper. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows, name tags stuck to cardigan sleeves, and that soft murmur of possibility hummed in the air. I sat near the back, letting the chatter roll over me like soft surf. The program director called for volunteers to introduce themselves. I didn't plan to raise my hand, but when silence stretched a little too long, something in me stood up before my mind caught up. I walked to the front, smoothing my jacket. The microphone crackled. My name's Rachel Linwood. I'm a returning fellow in public policy. I grew up in Colorado, and I used to think starting over meant erasing what came before. I paused, but now I think it just means learning how to tell the truth, out loud, to yourself and sometimes to strangers in folding chairs. A few people chuckled gently. I smiled, not because I nailed it, but because I meant it. Later that day, I opened the door to my new apartment in Brooklyn. The light filtered in through tall windows that didn't rattle. There were no family heirlooms, no borrowed lamps, just a secondhand bookshelf, an unmade bed, and a small wooden table with room for 2 mugs. I took one photo from my backpack and set it on the windowsill. It was me and Grandma Jo on her porch 2 summers ago, holding mismatched glasses of sweet tea and squinting at the sun. She had lipstick on her teeth. I never told her. She wouldn't have cared. In the quiet, I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened a folder labeled Linwood Reclamation Fund. That was the name I gave the scholarship. I'd set it up using what remained after legal costs and restitution, just enough to seed something new. One application had already come in. A sophomore at a state school in Arkansas, raised by a single dad, writing about wanting to make his community safer for the elderly. I read it 3 times. And then I cried, not from sadness, not even relief, just release, like something that had been wrapped around my chest finally unraveled. There was a knock on my door. I wiped my face before opening it. Lucas stood there holding out a coffee. "You forgot your badge," he said, raising an eyebrow. Again. I took it from him with a grin. "Thanks. How many times before it gets revoked?" "At NYU? Depends if you bring muffins next time." He stepped back, didn't linger, didn't pry, just nodded. "See you at seminar? Wouldn't miss it." When the door clicked shut, I sat again at the table and scrolled through my phone. The most recent voicemail was 2 months old, but I still hadn't deleted it. I tapped play. Grandma Jo's voice came through, soft and southern as ever. "You did good, baby. I know it wasn't easy. It never is when you decide to tell the truth louder than the people lying, but you did good. Now go live like you mean it." I let the message play twice. Then I opened my journal and wrote something Cheryl used to say. "A real woman doesn't make noise." I stared at the line. Then slowly, I crossed it out. With ink, thick and final. There was a time I thought trust was something people handed to you, like a gift you had to be grateful for. I thought my worth was measured by how well I stayed quiet, how smoothly I folded myself into corners to avoid making others uncomfortable. But not anymore. Trust, I've learned, isn't something you're given. It's something you build, and I'm just getting started. I used to think trust came in the shape of a checkbook or a smile at brunch, but sometimes it takes walking away to remember who you are. In life, boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges that protect what matters most. And family isn't about blood, but about who shows up when the lights are low and the truth is loud. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know. What part made you stop and think? Share it with someone you trust, or leave a thought below.